Welcome to The Real Math of Business with Alana Bennett, where you plus this podcast equals better decisions. I'm Alana Bennett, speaker, author, and leadership expert. I work with chief executive officers and chief financial officers really to help them create universally investable companies where people serve people and the math just works. Now, this week we're doing something a little different, last episode of the year, and if I reflect upon the year that's been, and my intention, I had the benefit of seeing Oprah recently when she came to Sydney, and one of her key lessons that I took from her conversation was to be really clear in your intention and also clear in understanding the consequence of said intention, because you will always get the consequence, get the outcome of your intention. Now, my intention starting this podcast was to have fun and interesting conversations with smart people. And I've really held on to that intention, and it's been absolutely brilliant. It's been a light in my dark times this year. And I have a huge amount of gratitude for all of the guests that we've had. I have learned from every single one of the guests that we've had. Everyone has brought their own unique perspective to the real math of business. And I think that's the point. And that's kind of the message, part of the message that I want to get out around the real math of business. But my main message, my main learning this year with respect to this podcast this year is to be intentional. Take the time to be really clear on your intentions, be really honest about the outcomes and consequences. So be clean and clear about it. And then share it with the people in your circle, because you'll get what you want. And so, that would be my parting message for the year for you. But what we've got as a little gift today is the little clips from the top 5 most watched episodes of the year. They've been so wonderful talking with these guests, and it just so happens that these are the ones that stuck out for our listeners. So I hope you enjoy a little bit of a trip down memory lane and maybe an entry point to these 5 great guests. Also, just a huge thank you and huge amount of gratitude and love for those, every single person that I interviewed this year. You have been my light, and I'm very grateful for that. And I'm really grateful for you listening and watching the show as well. So enjoy our little recap, our little retrospective, and look forward to kicking off once again in 2026. With the companies that you work with, how do you ground them? How do you ground them, and how do you get them to focus on just the 2 things, not the 200 projects they think they can achieve before the end of the financial year? How do you practically do that with them?
One of them is we play a game around who's flying the plane. So if you go through the tasks that people do in their day jobs, and then the things they do under pressure and the things they do because it helps people out, and you start to get this, you get this stretch across a particular leadership team. Let's take a leadership team, C-suite leadership team. And then we go through an analogy, which is who's flying the plane. So this is based on a semi-true story. Plane takes off, there's a disturbance in business class, and there's a blocked toilet in economy. Cabin crew are overwhelmed. They knock on the cockpit door. The captain comes out to deal with the economy toilet. While dealing with the economy toilet, the co-pilot's flying the aeroplane. On the way back through business class, one of the business class passengers hasn't got a drink. The pilot serves the drink as the aeroplane flies into a mountain. And so this is the analogy that breaks it for people. It's if your job is to manage finances, to deal with strategy, then that is the job only you can do. The job only the pilots can do is fly the plane. They shouldn't be serving drinks and fixing blocked toilets. And the number of times a CEO can get the light bulb moment and go, I've got my hand down the toilet right now trying to get toilet paper out of a U-bend. I'm not thinking about the strategic future of the business. I'm not thinking about the over the horizon, whatever that is, 3, 5 years, 2 months, doesn't matter. Whatever your horizon is. Yeah. Getting people into that, literally into the analogy of what's your place in this organization? So what is your role? What is your stretch? And what is your, I'm never going there? Because if I'm not flying the plane, who is? And the answer is nobody. Yeah. Because there's nobody else to do that. So in C-suite jobs, in CFOs, CEOs, CSOs, CIOs, CTOs, they have jobs. And they have a very specific role that only that person in that role, and again, this comes back to value. When you know what your role is and what you do, you know your contribution, not just to the team, but to the organization, and therefore you feel valued within that team, and it reduces threat. When everyone thinks everyone can do everyone else's job, it's a great party plane until it flies into the mountain. And then everyone's a little bit this is where you get teams who are kind of like, no one trusts anybody, because everyone thinks, well, you can serve the drinks and I can serve the drinks. And if you serve the drinks better than I serve the drinks, I'm going to get fired because I'm more expensive than you. That creates a low trust environment because everyone's feeling threatened by everybody else. If I know I'm the co-pilot, my job is to support the pilot, help the pilot make critical decisions, and keep distraction away from the pilot, particularly in bad weather and uncertain times. That's what I'm doing. That's my role here, and that's all I'm doing. And so we start to get people literally placed through the organization to go, this is your wheelhouse. This is your strength. And this is the boundary of where you stretch to. And the minute you step outside that, you're serving drinks and the plane's flying into a mountain. And it's an analogy that sticks with people. Once they've figured out how many times a day they're going to the back of the plane and emptying toilets, it helps them start to figure out how that aircraft should work in their situation.
If I'm sitting here listening or watching this conversation, and maybe my company's in a little bit of distress, or maybe I feel like I'm acting like I'm in the red, but in actual fact, the numbers tell me I'm in the black. Like, how do I know that I can give myself permission to go, you know what, the foundations are good. Listening to what Jules is saying is going to give me the courage to do what I want to do, and that's invest in my people, make sure we've got the partnerships, etc. How do I know that?
There are two things I'd suggest. The first is, if you're in the red, you're not going to get to the black unless you've engaged your team. So in all of my experience of restructurings and turnarounds, the successful ones, they only happen because the leaders have come up with a plan and actually activated their organization because it's a collective effort. So that would be the first point, is if you're a leader, sitting in a situation and you're trying to work out what is the way through this and how do I move from, get out of the red and into the black. It's not a one person show. Like, leadership is a team sport. And so that means you've got to actually engage your organization to get there. So that would be the first sort of point. And the second is, you asked about, what do I need to give myself permission for? I think part of the reason I have shifted my career focus from, taking interim CFO roles and that sort of thing into more the leadership and performance space has really been because of the work that I saw Brené Brown do around courageous leadership, and how that her research actually matched up with what I had seen in my career, which was the ability for a leader to lean into those difficult conversations is what actually made progress for them. And so if there's one thing I would encourage leaders to do, it's, what is the hard conversation or the difficult conversation that you've been avoiding that you need to have, and go and do that conversation, because it's actually like progress will be made when you have those tough conversations, whether it is having a difficult performance conversation and giving feedback to someone in the team that's not performing where you think they are, whether it's with a stakeholder where you're actually having to deliver bad news, but then you can move forward. Like, the very fact that you're actually, like, give yourself the permission to go and have the hard conversations, because that is what will actually build your courage over time.
When I deal with top sales teams and the top performers within a team, there's such a distinction between them and the rest of the group. Yes, it's often they've got tenure, they've been in the business, or they've been in the industry for a long time, or selling, but they approach selling very differently to those who aren't as successful. Now, sometimes they're not successful because they're new in the business, but when I look at the top 1% or that top tier, they approach sales expecting a yes. They are expecting a yes from the customer, and they're surprised when they get the no. And it's such a vast different approach to the bulk of the other team, where they approach the sale expecting a no, and then they're surprised by the yes. And it took me a while to figure that out. And I must have heard it when I did a lot of call centers about 12 years ago, I was working for Seller Masters as I entered into the whole Woolworths arena, and it is a huge arena. And there was a call center there. We had about 200 in the outbound team, maybe about 60 in the inbound team. And I really started to fine tune the craft of teaching people how to sell, because I was training tens of thousands of people within over about a 7-year period. And in a call center, you got high turnover, and you're listening to bulk volume of calls. So you get good at your craft really quick, both from the sales team's perspective, but also for me as a sales trainer. And I worked with Seller Masters for about 7 years. Heard a lot of people sell a lot of wine. And that's when I really started to listen to, and I'd hear the difference between the really great teams. I'm like, talk to me about when you're approaching into a call. Like, what are you expecting? And the top performers go, I'm expecting the sale. And they're like, and we're surprised when we don't get the sale. And then I asked the same with the teams. The other teams, and a lot of them, I could hear it in their voice. They're bracing themselves for impact of a no. And when they'd get a yes, I'd often hear them go, oh, as if to say, what? And then they'd scramble going, oh my God, I wasn't prepared for the yes. I don't know how to close the sale now. And that was such an eye-opening experience for me. And I've seen this now in all I work in such broad industries, and it's still the same. And that's a lot of what I work on when I'm teaching both skills, is looking at that belief and helping them really lift up that self-belief and start to expect the yes. They go in just as prepared. In fact, they're super prepared, even if they're expecting a yes. They know their product, but it's like, well, the conversation is really to make sure that's a good fit from what we've got to what you want. And then I'm just going to button this up and move us forward. It's not this big show and, song and dance and, I've got to really get them across the line. It's like the line's already done. We've already done that. It's less transactional. It's a lot more relationship oriented. But yeah, it was such an eye-opening experience when I was like, that is a game changer.
How do you make sense of the business world these days? And I'd love for you to answer that question, in the present, and then also do a bit of a reflection for us and explain how that has changed over the years and over your quite illustrious, if I can use that term, career.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You're asking me at a good time, because I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, about what is the problem, and in the context of thinking about a CEO's role, an executive's role, what is the problem that they're dealing with every day? And it is a function of what's going on in the world, which is only accelerating. It's only more unpredictable. And that is one word: misalignment. If you think about the role of a CEO or any person pursuing a goal and objective, the real challenge is to find alignment. It's to go on this journey of trying things, learning from failure, adapting your course until you get to that place where you really feel things are aligned. And so when I look at the world as it is today, change is just like in my early career in the 80s and 90s, every year in a decade had similarity. Whereas if I look at the last 5 to 10 years, every year has its own personality, its own challenges. COVID, and then, what was happening before COVID, then after COVID, and then things that happen on a global basis can affect everybody as well. Tariffs in the US. It's like every year is different. And the things we're worried about seem to vary a lot. So the good news is that whether it's moving fast and crazy or whether it's slower and still changing, the real thing to think about is, how do I go about recognizing misalignment and then addressing it in whatever context? And in a business context, as a CEO, I really believe that finding and fixing misalignment is basically your job. No one else can do it at an organizational scale, because a CEO is actually the only person who's cross-functional. And you might say, well, what about my CFO? They care about cross-functional. Well, no. They run finance. You should say, well, we've got a COO who handles quite a few functions. Well, they might be cross-functional, but they're really just part of a CEO's role. I mean, a COO is often, a CEO says, I want to bring someone to help me with these functions that report to me. the CEO still remains the only person who really cares about the cross-functional nature and capability and alignment of an organization.
Now, one of the things that I always hear from every single client that I work with is I just want to be my authentic self. And it all sounds lovely, and it's a little bit of a kumbaya moment. Actually, in fact, most of them vomit when they say it because they kind of go, oh, it just feels a bit icky, right? But then that's all well and good, right? They're professionals, and they know that leadership today, you do need to be your full self, authentic self, genuine self, whatever that means. That's fine. I can go in and I can elect to go into a company that shares values, and I can be authentic. Now, in a family business, just because you're part of a family does not mean you naturally share the same values, perspectives, and views as your siblings or parents or children. So I'm just really curious when you talk about, the benefits of the diversity, the benefits of being able to have these conversations around a family. But at the same time, Danette, what do you do when you suddenly, how do you be truly authentic in a family business when by construct you're needing to fit into something?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alana. So part of being authentic is learning what are your strengths? What are the areas you're not so good at? So when you're in a family business, it's okay to not have the same values. It's important to have certain values together. If the business is built on, say, sustainability, and you totally don't agree with that, that means decisions will be interesting, but it could still be managed in that instance. But I think what happens in any business, and this is private sector, government, etc., is when we don't know who we truly are, we might flip and flop on decisions because we're not driven by our values, we're not driven by our purpose because we're not really aware of them. Mm-hmm. The other thing is our brains all filter differently. So every single person that comes into an organisation, whether they're family or not, brings a different perspective. And when I know that that's the value I bring to an organisation, when I talked earlier about making strong, not wrong, if I can bring in multiple perspectives that are quite diverse and we're dealing with a challenge that's difficult, we're going to get a better solution with that diversity. Now, it's going to take probably a little bit longer because we're going to have difficult, uncomfortable conversations. And I was on a podcast just before this and talking to a dear friend of mine, Anne Braithwaite, and she was talking about what we know is when everyone looks and sounds and feels the same, you'll get a quicker decision, but there'll be blind spots. And she actually used the idea of a frame and then everyone looks the same. So everyone's in the same little circle. Well, there's lots of bits within that frame then that group's not seeing. But if you've got different dots because everyone's different, you're going to see more of those blind spots and therefore make better decisions. So I think, and I think I just took myself off on a rabbit hole track.
Love the rabbit holes.
When we all learn to be authentic, we also are able to go, hey, I'm not quite understanding that perspective. Can you tell me more? And I'm not saying you're right or wrong. I actually genuinely want to learn so that I can get rid of some of my blind spots. Whereas if none of us are authentic, we're going to have good conversations, but they're not going to be deep. And we're going to have blind spots if we're all trying to be exactly the same. And that longer term's probably not great for the organisation because the decisions we're going to make are not going to pick up. As we know, the world's changing so fast, they're not going to pick that up because we'll just go, well, my view of the world is it looks like this. And in fact, it looks like this. So, yeah.